Today we're going to do a species profile on the Siamese algae eater, so hang in there with me. When we come back, we're going to talk about this amazing fish that really gets overlooked in the hobby sometimes and gets confused with some other fish that aren't so great for your tank. So if you hang in there with me today, we're going to talk about specifically the Siamese algae eater and the fantastic role that this fish can have as part of your cleanup crew in your tank. We'll see you in just a minute. So let's talk about the Siamese algae eater, otherwise known as the Crossocheilus oblongus, which is their scientific name. This is a fish that I think gets completely overlooked sometimes by maybe your new hobbyist who doesn't really know much about this particular species or doesn't understand the role that they may play in a tank. These are algae eaters, and they are very specific kinds of algae eaters and require a certain environment in order to survive and do well. Now, there are myths about these fish, and there are misunderstandings about whether you're really getting a Siamese algae eater or you're getting something else. There are two fish that are very similar to these particular fish, and that would be the Siamese flying fox, which is a completely different fish but looks almost identical, with the exception of the color of the Siamese algae eater is going to be a gray with a little hint of gold in it, with a solid black line that goes all the way from the front of their head to the end of their tail. Now that may fade as they get older towards the end of the tail, but it's a very prominent thing. The flying fox does not have that. The Chinese algae eater, which is also confused with this because of the name, Siamese algae eater, Chinese algae eater, can also be confusing, but these fish are very different as well. Although the Chinese algae eater is an algae eater, they are very different in the way they behave in a tank and can be extremely aggressive in a community tank, and you don't want to confuse the two of these. I made that mistake early on when I was getting these fish for my community tank, and that was some years back, and I was rudely awakened by the idea that I had made a huge mistake and had not done my homework. Now, the care of these fish is easy. They're not a hard fish to keep at all. The water parameters for these fish, they do like a bit of an acidic water or a softer water, I should say. As far as flow in your tank, they'll tolerate pretty much anything because they are river fish that are found in Southeast Asia, such as Thailand, and places near that part of the world. And so acidic water is something that you want to try to have for them, but they're very tolerant of pHs running anywhere from 6.8 all the way up to 8.0. I have never had a problem with pH and these particular fish, so it is something that I don't think you need to worry about. Now, these guys are very, very peaceful fish. They're not aggressive in any way. They're not going to cause problems in your tank with other fish, as long as you have enough room for them. And when I say enough room, I would suggest to you that you have a minimum tank for 2 or 3 small Siamese algae eaters of a 20-gallon, and then as they get bigger, if you have larger tanks, you might want to rotate those fish up to those larger tanks as they grow. Because the more room they have, the better they're going to enjoy their life and move about the tank, because they can be very, very interesting fish. The movements are great. They're a fish that tends to stay at the bottom of the tank, and I would recommend, if you do have the ability to have a sandy bottom, that is best for their barbels, which is a very common, 2 bars that come off their mouth. Actually, it may be 4 on this fish. I'd have to look that up, and I will write that in the bottom in the description area when I post this video. I need to verify that. But just like any fish that is a bottom feeder or a scavenger type fish, these fish are basically from the carp family, so they are considered a scavenger fish. And algae just happens to be their main source of food that they're looking for, and they are extremely good at it. If you are careful to make sure that you have a well-planted tank, and I mean a heavily planted tank, or at least have a good portion of your tank planted, these fish are really going to thrive, because this is where they're going to find their diet. Their diet is in eating off the leaves of the plants, the algae that may grow on there, and anything on wood or rocks or anything like that. So making sure that you have a well-planted tank is probably a good idea for these fish. Now, these guys can live up to 10 years and get up to 6 inches. So think about that before you buy these fish. If you have a 20-gallon tank and you have no intentions of ever getting a larger tank, then this fish may be a temporary fish in your tank that you may have to rehome at some point, because these guys are going to get up to 6 inches at some point. And you know, a lot of people have this idea that the fish will only grow the size of the tank, and that is not the case at all. You need to do your homework and make sure that you have the right size tank for these fish, and that they have the proper environment, because they will thrive if you do. If not, it's going to get rather crowded in your 20-gallon, and these guys do grow rather quickly. I've seen Siamese algae eaters that I have bought at a little over 1.5 to 2 inches, and within just 3 months or so, these guys are up to 3 inches easily. So at that rate, as you can see, these fish are going to outgrow your tank rather quickly if you're not careful and you haven't really made sure that these fish are ideal for your situation. Now, their diet is omnivore, obviously. They will pretty much eat anything that you put in the tank. I've put black worms, red worms, I've put frozen foods, flake, anything you can think of in the tanks, and they will eat it. They're scavengers, so they're great fish as part of your cleanup crew. If you have these fish, the Siamese algae eater, along with a school of Corydoras and a pleco, your tank, and some snails, I would say either some mystery snails or some nearite snails if you can keep them alive. These fish are going to be great for keeping your tank really, really clean and in top shape, as long as you're doing everything else you need to do, such as water changes, cleaning your filters, and doing all the things that make their environment perfect for them. So, or perfect for any of your fish, really. All of these fish need to be in environments where they can thrive, and the best way to do that is just keep up on the maintenance of your tank. Now, as far as heating goes, these fish live in temperatures no lower than 76 degrees all the way up to 86 degrees. I've had no problems with them in temperatures that high, but their range is somewhere between 76 and 79 degrees. It's ideal for them. But again, as I said, with my discus tanks, where the temperatures are much higher, I haven't had any problems with keeping these. Now, one of the things you want to think about is These fish are fast-moving fish, and any species of fish in your tank that is, kind of freaked out by the idea that they have fast-moving fish around them, this would not be an ideal fish for that species. Now, I've had them in with discus before where they've done real well, and then they've gotten a little bit bigger and they start to freak the discus fish out a little bit because they're fast movers and they're constantly going after any food that comes into the tank and sort of overwhelming the discus a little bit and intimidating them. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that so that your discus fish are not freaked out. If you see your discus fish hiding and your Siamese algae eaters are getting a little bit bigger, that could be the reason why these fish your discus fish are starting to behave a little bit differently. I've seen this happen in my own tanks, so I'm very careful, as I said, to rotate them out as they get bigger. If they're a smaller fish and they're moving faster, it doesn't seem to bother a fish like a discus or something in that size range. Angelfish, any of these kinds of fish are sometimes freaked out by fast-moving fish around them. So keep that in mind and watch for those behaviors as you're getting further and further into the life of your tank. Now, as far as compatibility, these are very, very peaceful fish. They're not aggressive towards other fish at all. And so I would tell you that almost any tank is going to do as long as the parameters of that tank are not in such a way that the Siamese algae eater can't thrive. But they're very tolerant fish. They're very adaptable, they're very tolerant, and as I said, they're very peaceful fish. So the concern about putting them in a community tank, I wouldn't have any concerns about that. When we come back, we're going to talk about some final things that I think are important that people don't think of with the Siamese algae eater, and we'll close out this video. Anyways, we'll talk about that when we continue, and we'll see you in just a minute here. So the last points that I want to make on this particular fish, on this profile of the Siamese algae eater, is a couple of points that I have already said in the video, but I want to kind of drive it home to you because it's so important. Number one, be careful when you're asking about Siamese algae eaters that you don't end up with a Siamese flying fox or a Chinese algae eater, because it's so easy for somebody to misunderstand what you're looking for. Or if you're buying something at a big box store like this, you're working with people who really don't have an education about these kinds of fish and can steer you in the wrong direction and send you home with something that you really do not want. The flying fox is easily taken for a Siamese algae eater, and those of us who know the differences are not going to have a problem. But those of you who are new to the hobby and are not aware of these fish, it can be easily misunderstood, and you could be sent home with something that's not going to be good for your tank at all. And I don't want that to happen, so I want to make sure you do understand. And now, the Siamese algae eater, as I said, a very peaceful fish. If you can keep them in a planted aquarium, this is the absolute best environment for them. Do not put them into a tank such as a African cichlid tank where there are no plants hardly at all, or places for these fish to go in and out of the plants and find algae on the leaves and things like that. They're just not going to do well. They may do well if you feed the heck out of them and you're just looking for them as a fish that sort of fills out the rest of your tank as far as the way you want it to look, because they are good looking fish. They really truly are a good looking fish. They're very streamlined, and they're just very beautiful to watch. They're very graceful, very fast in the water. But again, I recommend that you put them in a tank that's well planted, in a tank where they're going to get a good source of food. Now, if you want these guys to do their job, be extremely careful not to overfeed in your tank where the Siamese algae eater ends up eating all the foods that you're putting in there and starts to ignore the algae. That is a common mistake that people make, is thinking that these fish need to be fed specifically. Now, if there's not enough algae in your tank, that's going to be a problem, and you're going to have to supplement that with some tabs of some kind that are algae specific, and they will thrive off those. But that's not the point of it. The point is to add these to your cleanup crew and to have them do a particular thing for your tank as far as cleaning it up, or have a role in your tank of keeping your tank clean. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I love doing these fish profiles, species profiles, and I don't do enough of them, and it appears that that's what people are asking me to do more of, and they like that. So you'll be seeing me weave these in and out of my videos over the next months, and I'm going to try to be a little bit better about that. But thank you for joining me today. Please leave your comments down below if you have anything you'd like to add about this particular fish. I would really appreciate it. If I've missed something, or if I've said something that you don't agree with, I don't have a problem with that. We're all learning all the time. Leave that in the comment line down below. As I said, I will leave other information about the Siamese algae eater in the description area, where you can get very specific information about these fish. I will make sure that that is included in that video, so in this video I should say. And again, thank you for joining me today. Go out and get yourself some Siamese algae eaters and watch these guys thrive, but do your homework, as I said, and make sure you understand that these fish are rapid growers. They're pretty fast moving fish in your tank, so you want to think about those two things when you're getting them to make sure that they're an ideal fit for your particular tank. So anyways, thank you for joining me again today on a video that I thought was really important for those of us out there who are always looking to balance our tanks out. And I thought this fish deserved the time that I've put into it today to tell you about it. So anyways, again, thank you for joining me. We will see you on the next one. Until then, we are out of here.